The Strait of Hormuz. April 2026. A U.S. Navy destroyer is holding position 22 miles off the Iranian coastline. It has 17 warships beside it, more than 100 aircraft overhead, and 10,000 sailors backing it up. By every conventional measure, this is the most powerful naval blockade assembled in a generation, and it is not working. Iranian fast boats are slipping past the outer cordon. Not every night, but enough nights. 2 foreign tankers have been seized. A third barely escaped. Oil shipments are turning back, and not because the Navy stopped them. Everyone is watching the warships. Nobody is talking about what is happening on the flight decks of the USS Bataan, because the problem at Hormuz was never about firepower. The U.S. Navy has enough firepower to reduce the Iranian coastline to glass. The problem was geometry. And geometry is something the 26th Marine Expeditionary Unit was built to solve. This is the full story. To understand what the Marines changed, you have to understand how this blockade was designed and why it started failing almost immediately after it was announced. On February 28, 2026, U.S. and Israeli forces launched coordinated strikes against Iranian nuclear infrastructure. Within 72 hours, the U.S. Navy moved to seal the Strait of Hormuz, the 21-mile-wide choke point through which roughly 20% of all globally traded oil passes every single day. The strategic logic was straightforward. Cut off Iran's oil exports, collapse the revenue stream funding its military, and force Tehran to the table. By early April, U.S. Central Command reported that 31 vessels had been turned back. Insurance rates on Gulf routes had tripled in 6 weeks. Tanker traffic through the strait was down more than 40% from its February baseline. On paper, that is a functioning blockade. But here is what the numbers obscure. The Strait of Hormuz is not 21 miles wide at its operational narrowest. The navigable shipping channel, the lane deep enough for a laden supertanker, is approximately 2 miles wide, split into 2 one-mile corridors by a traffic separation scheme. Every oil tanker that has ever transited the Gulf uses one of those 2 corridors. There are no alternate routes. The Navy knew exactly where to station its ships. Iran knew exactly where to station its fast boats. This is not a story about a superpower struggling against an asymmetric adversary. That framing misses the actual problem entirely. This is a story about the difference between controlling open water and controlling a coastline, and why those 2 missions require fundamentally different forces. The Navy controls open water. It does it better than any force in human history. Its destroyers are optimized to fight other ships, hunt submarines, and shoot down incoming missiles across hundreds of miles of blue water ocean. For that mission, nothing on the planet is close. But Iran's coastline runs for approximately 1,500 miles. It contains dozens of small ports, coves, and Revolutionary Guard coastal stations the Navy cannot cover simultaneously. From those inlets, IRGC Navy fast boats were launching harassment runs the destroyer cordon was physically unable to intercept in time. The Navy needed something that could fight in 12 feet of water, something that could move at 35 knots in a sea state that would capsize a rigid inflatable, something that could launch from a ship, strike a 40-foot fiberglass hull, and be back aboard before Iranian radar confirmed it was ever there. A destroyer cannot do that. An Arleigh Burke-class hull draws 31 feet of water. It cannot close to within 5 nautical miles of most of the Iranian coast without grounding. The Marines were not constrained by any of that. The geography of the strait creates a tactical problem no surface combatant was ever designed to solve. The coastline running southeast from Bandar Abbas toward Jask contains at least 14 identified small craft launch points within 30 miles of the main shipping corridor. From the inlet at Kuhestak to the outer edge of the northbound shipping lane is approximately 11 nautical miles. At 45 knots, the top speed of an Iranian Baghhamar, that is under 15 minutes from launch to engagement range. A destroyer moving to intercept needs to be within 8 nautical miles to have confidence in its close-in weapon solution. At 30 knots sustained sprint, closing that gap from a standing patrol position takes 20 minutes. The math does not work. By the time the destroyer arrives, the fast boat has already fired, turned, and crossed back inside Iranian territorial waters, where the rules of engagement do not permit pursuit. Think of it this way. The Navy spent 80 years building ships optimized to fight other ships across hundreds of miles of open ocean. But the Strait of Hormuz is not a blue water battle space. In operational terms, it is a very large river delta, shallow, congested, and full of small craft traffic that provides perfect concealment for an adversary who knows every inlet by name. In 12 feet of water, 400 yards from an Iranian rocky shoreline, the most powerful Navy in history is completely blind. The Marines were not. The 26th Marine Expeditionary Unit arrived in theater aboard the USS Bataan Amphibious Ready Group. 3 ships, approximately 2,200 Marines, and a collection of platforms specifically engineered for the problem defeating the naval cordon. MV-22 B Osprey tiltrotor aircraft with a combat radius of 430 nautical miles and a cruise speed of 270 knots. The Osprey launches vertically from the flight deck, flies nap of the earth at 200 feet, and arrives over a fast boat launch point in under 8 minutes from a standoff position outside Iranian radar coverage. It needs a flight deck and 30 seconds of clearance. AH-1Z Viper attack helicopters. The Viper carries the AN/AAQ-30 target sight system, capable of identifying a 40-foot fiberglass hull at 8 kilometers in complete darkness. It is armed with AGM-114 Hellfire missiles, 100-pound precision munitions that destroy a small craft from 5 miles out. The 26th MEU brought 6 Vipers. Each one can be airborne from alert status in under 4 minutes. Rigid hull inflatable boats capable of 45 knots in sea states that would swamp lighter craft. Against IRGCN fast boats operating in their own coastal waters, the Marines had hulls that matched speed, draft, and maneuverability, something no destroyer in the fleet could claim. F-35. B. Lightning, 2 strike fighters operating in short takeoff and vertical landing configuration. The F-35B carries the AN/A PG-81 AESA radar, tracking 19 separate surface contacts simultaneously while cross-cueing the Vipers in real time. The 26th MEU did not bring more firepower. The firepower was already there. They brought the right geometry. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy is not a conventional force, and it should not be analyzed as one. The IRGCN spent 15 years studying American naval doctrine. It watched the USS Cole bombing in 2000. It studied the 2016 capture of 2 U.S. patrol boats near Farsi Island. It read every Millennium Challenge war game summary that leaked into open source reporting. Tehran understood something fundamental. The United States Navy cannot be defeated in a conventional engagement in the Persian Gulf. So the IRGCN stopped trying to fight that war. Instead, it built a doctrine called mosaic defense, a distributed swarm of small, fast, cheap platforms designed not to sink American ships, but to saturate American decision-making. 1 fast boat is trivial. 14 fast boats launching simultaneously from 6 different inlets, each one triggering a separate rules of engagement decision, each one demanding a separate weapons release authorization. That is a different problem entirely. The IRGCN Baghhamar fleet numbers somewhere between 100 and 200 operational fast attack craft, dispersed in cells of 4 to 8. They do not use frequencies U.S. electronic warfare assets can easily jam. They use visual signals and pre-brief timing sequences built specifically for a saturated electromagnetic environment. When the blockade was announced, Tehran did not attempt to break it head-on. It attempted to make enforcing it so costly in time, in decision bandwidth, in rules of engagement ambiguity, that Washington would quietly allow exceptions. For the first 3 weeks, that strategy was working. The change in the operational picture at Hormuz became visible in the incident data starting around April 15th. In the first 2 weeks of the blockade, before the 26th MEU was fully integrated into the patrol rotation, the IRGCN conducted an estimated 11 harassment incidents against commercial vessels. 2 resulted in seizures. 1 resulted in shots fired. In the 10 days following full integration of marine aviation into the Hormuz patrol sector, the number of successful fast boat interdictions dropped to 0. The IRGCN did not stop launching boats. U.S. surveillance assets confirmed continued small craft activity at multiple inlet sites. The boats were simply turning back before reaching the shipping corridor. Consistently, across multiple sites simultaneously. The reason is not complicated. The IRGCN commanders now know that within 6 minutes of clearing their inlet, there is a statistically significant probability of an AH-1Z Viper arriving on their position with a Hellfire locked to their hull signature. The mosaic doctrine requires willingness to accept attrition. Attrition at that rate, fast, decisive, one way, is a different calculation than the harassment campaign the doctrine was designed to sustain. This is what the Navy could not provide. Not more firepower, faster consequence. At 35 knots, a fast boat can traverse the navigable channel in under 20 minutes. The Marine Viper arrives in 6. The geometry changed, and when the geometry changed, the entire tactical calculus of Iran's mosaic doctrine collapsed with it. The situation at Hormuz, as of late April 2026, is not resolved. The ceasefire has been extended, the blockade continues. The Islamabad talks remain uncertain. Here is where this goes next. Scenario A. Negotiated de-escalation. Iran submits a unified proposal to the Islamabad track. The U.S. agrees to suspend the naval blockade as a gesture of good faith. The 26th MEU pulls back to an over-the-horizon posture. The harassment campaign formally ends. Oil markets partially stabilize. This requires Tehran's fractured leadership to reach internal consensus and Washington to accept a suspension that looks to a domestic audience like a concession. Both conditions are difficult. Neither is impossible. Scenario B. The gray zone. This is the one that should concern you most. Not because it is the most violent, because it has no end date. The talks produce a framework vague enough for both sides to claim partial victory. The blockade is nominally lifted. The 26th MEU stays position. Iran resumes small-scale fast boat activity below the threshold that would trigger a marine response, 1 incident per week instead of 11. Oil markets price in a permanent 15% risk premium. The corridor stays technically open but practically expensive. Neither side escalates. Neither side resolves. The strait becomes a managed crisis rather than a solved one. Scenario C. Full escalation. The talks collapse. The ceasefire expires. The IRGCN, facing the neutralization of its fast boat campaign, shifts to a different asset class: anti-ship ballistic missiles. The DF-type derivatives Iran has been reverse engineering since 2020 carry a 500-kilogram warhead and terminal guidance optimized for moving surface targets. A coordinated salvo of 6 to 8 missiles against a single amphibious ship is a scenario U.S. planners have wargamed and are not fully comfortable with. In this scenario, the Marines solved the fast boat problem at exactly the moment Iran decided the fast boats were no longer the main effort. Back to that destroyer. 22 miles off the Iranian coast. It is still there. The warships are still there. The blockade is still in place. But the flight deck of the USS Bataan is no longer quiet. Here is the single most important thing this story reveals. The Strait of Hormuz was never primarily a naval problem. It was a response time problem. And the United States military spent 80 years building naval platforms optimized for wars that happen at 500-mile range, not at 11 nautical miles, in 12 feet of water, against a 40-foot fiberglass boat moving at 45 knots at 2 in the morning. The Marines did not win at Hormuz because they are better fighters than the Navy. They solved the problem because they were built for a different geometry. And at Hormuz, that geometry was the only one that mattered. The fast boats have stopped reaching the shipping corridor. The inlets are still full. The Vipers are still on 4-minute alert. The ceasefire is still fragile. The Islamabad talks are still uncertain. And the Marines are still on the flight deck.